For decades, it's been a taboo subject, and in some communities, it still is. If you're a black man in Britain, you're 17 times more likely to be diagnosed with a serious mental health condition than if you're white. It's a startling statistic, and it led blogger and DJ Keith Dubay to make a film for the BBC to investigate why.
I was diagnosed with depression a few years ago. It was the hollow feeling of worthlessness a lot of the time. It was a horrible experience. It was very confusing because black people don't really do mental illness, so it's not something you grow up hearing a lot about. I think my lowest point was when I was continually waking up thinking, I don't want to live anymore.
For over 2 years, I didn't utter a single word about my depression to anyone. I was too ashamed. But then, I decided to out myself.
I wrote a blog, closed my laptop, and I went to sleep. So I've woken up a couple of hours later, and yeah, I had a crazy amount of messages from people. All of the messages were positive. And I also did realize that there were a lot of people just like me that were going through the exact same things I was.
One message in particular has caught my eye. It's from a 20-year-old uni student from Surrey called Simone.
So when did you first kind of feel like something wasn't right?
I think one time in year 10, there was a week where I just started having breakdowns. I remember there was one time when I just started crying randomly during break time. I realised there was something wrong.
So at any point, did you speak to your parents about?
I felt like if I was to tell my parents, they would just kind of brush over it and not kind of find out the root of the problem.
Do you feel like there's a stigma surrounding mental health, you know?
With parents, especially African parents, they don't have enough knowledge about it, especially the ones that were born and raised in Africa, like my parents were born and raised in Congo. I think I'm ready to see a doctor and finally get all checked out.
To find out just how it feels to be sectioned, I'm meeting Kemeta. She's been in and out of hospital since 2010 and suffers from bipolar disorder.
After I gave birth, it was quite a difficult birth. I then went to a GP, and then when I was at the GP, apparently no one from the early intervention team was available. So they called the police. So 5 policemen came into the GP and held me down, physically held me down to the floor, because no woman in their right mind is going to give up their 6-month-old.
Wow, so how did that make you feel at the time?
Words cannot describe the pain.
So what can we do about this? We can start talking about it more, Not going to solve the problems with the system overnight, but if we do talk about these things, that's the beginning.
Well, let's talk about this now with Malcolm Phillips, who manages a unit in West London that specialises in treating black people with mental health issues. Thank you very much for coming in to see us. You've spoken to Keith as part of that film, and something he said there really stood out. He said, black people don't really do mental illness. What do you make of that?
In all communities, there's a stigma about talking about mental illness. And I think that's partly what Keith is alluding to, as well as he may be alluding to the fact that the community are very reticent to engage with mental health services at all, which is one of the major issues that we're dealing with.
And in that film, we also saw the shocking account of Kemeta being sectioned. And we know that figures tell us that black men are 6 times more likely to be sectioned. You have 25 years in the profession. Do you feel they're being treated fairly?
That's very difficult.
Or differently?
They're certainly being treated differently. There's no controversy about that. We're aware that the much higher rates of sectioning, much higher rates of restraint.
Why do you think that is?
As I said, there's a great deal of stigma, but also within the communities there's a great deal of fear of mental health services. These figures are not unknown to the community, and so people hide away from services. People don't want to engage. People are also concerned that they may not be understood. Communities, African and Caribbean communities' understanding of mental illness may be very different from a European understanding. And so when they do get into touch with services, it's often under compulsion and they're often much more unwell.
We heard Keith again, you know, in that report saying, you know, we've got to start talking about it more, and that includes the family. You've just said how difficult that is, but we know that 65% of black people with mental health issues feel treated unfairly by their family. Do you think that is the key to changing and helping move things forward?
I think a great deal of work has to be done in working with families, with communities, to better understand mental health as it's understood in this country, as services are provided, but also to be able to share with each other their own views and understandings of mental illness. People's concerns about mental illness often leads to people being isolated and separated from family, which only makes issues worse.
So you're saying it starts with the families and communities themselves?
Yes, yeah.
Malcolm Phillips, many thanks for your time. Thank you.
No problem.
And you can see the full documentary, Being Black, Going Crazy, which is available to watch on the BBC iPlayer now.